Evening. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody, all over the world. Welcome to another Parsha class of the Rebbe on the Parsha of the week. This week is a special week, Parsha Pekudei. It's Parsha Chazak. It's Parsha Zacha. No, not Parsha Zacha. It's Parsha Chazak. It's the Parsha that we finished the second book of the Torah, and therefore all those that are on Zoom should remember to order a new book. I don't know if they send it out already. The book of Vayikra is a new book, the new class that's coming up in a couple of weeks. So make sure that you get this new book. You need a half for the upcoming Parsha classes. It's a beautiful Sikh of the Rebbe on this week. As we finish the book of Shemos, and we go into the book of Leviticus, the book of Karbonis, because this week's Parsha is self-understood. Are the building of the Mishkan, the building of this tabernacle that was with the Jews in the desert, and it was with the Jews in Israel for many years, until they built the temple by King Solomon, which was like 500 years after they came to Israel, was all the most important service, especially for the Jewish people, for a regular Jew, in this Mishkan was a Karbonis, a sacrificial offering. Something that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. But you're going to soon come to in a week from now, next week, you're going to start Leviticus. The whole Leviticus is about sacrificial offerings that were brought in the temple. So we, in a small way, we started off this week, in this week's portion, Parsha Pekudei, which talks about the dedication of this temple, even though that the dedication of the temple we're going to read as in the book of Leviticus, in the book of B'yom Hashmini, on the 8th day of the dedication of the temple. It's brought down in this week's Parsha, this story. The story begins actually the dedication of the temple in this week's portion. So we know that the Jewish people sinned the golden calf they made after 40 days after receiving the Torah on the 7th day of Sivan, right? 40 days later, they sinned, and for the next 80 days, Moshe Rabbeinu for the next 40 days pleaded with God for forgiveness. Another 40 days, God forgave the Jewish nation, and that ended on the day of Yom Kippur, the 10th of Tishrei. So this whole story started off on the 7th of Sivan, Tammuz, Av, Elul, Tishrei. The 10th day of Tishrei, Yom Kippur, is a day that God said, I forgave the Jewish nation, became the Day of Atonement, right? The 11th day of Tishrei, the Jewish people started with the building of the Mishkan. The 11th day of Tishrei. I'm using Hebrew dates, so I can't tell you the English dates. The 11th day of Tishrei was when you know Tishrei. Tishrei is how the month where Rosh Hashanah is and Yom Kippur is. So the day of Yom Kippur is the 11th day. Yom Kippur is on the 10th day. The 11th day of Yom Kippur, they went out to collect money and all the material for this Mishkan, this tabernacle, and they built it from the 11th day of Tishrei till the 25th day of Kislev. Okay, so that's 11th day of Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev. So it's like almost 2 months, a little bit over 2 months. 11th day of Kislev would have been 2 months, so add another 14 days. So it took him two and a half months to build this Mishkan. 25th day of Kislev was Hanukkah. That's the Hebrew day. That's the Hanukkah celebration of Hanukkah, and that's ultimately really when the temple, the time of the first temple, was rededicated. Right after the story of the Greeks, and it was a day of dedication. It became a day of celebration. Hanukkah is called Hanukkah because of Chanukas HaMizbeach, the dedication of the temple. They rededicated the temple. So ultimately, the dedication of the temple happened on that day when they finished the Mishkan in the desert. But God said in the Torah, in this week's portion, God says to the Jewish people, even though you finished the temple, you shouldn't have the dedication until there's Chodesh Nisan, which is the upcoming month. Chodesh Nisan. the first month in the Jewish calendar. So that means that the Mishkan stood for 5 days in Kislev, Tevish, Shvat, Adar, 3 more months. It was not put together. And then the dedication happened on the first day of Nisan, right? But they started with the service in a way, the investor of the Kohanim to introduce them, to introduce Aaron and his sons to the base up to the Mishkan. They started 7 days of Meluyim. That's why it's called the portion of the week we're going to learn Vayikra. It's called Bayom Hashmini, on the 8th day. So there was 7 days, ultimately 8 days of dedication. The 8th day of dedication was the Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the month of Nisan, the first day of the month of the year. It's mentioned actually in today's reading, actually in the Chumash. So that's the order, the chronological order. So right now we're in even in this week's portion, we have the 8 days. The 8 days of, I think the word in Hebrew, it's called Meluyim. The 7 days of Meluyim, the 7 days of investor. Is that what the investor? That's the fancy English word. Investor means education, or bringing them into the business. Okay, took the 7 days. What happened those 7 days? Those 8 ultimately till the 8th day, as the Medrash tells us that those 8 days, those 8 days, until the 8th day was when Aaron became the high priest. Until the 8th day, Moses was the priest. He was the Kohen. He was the guy who knew the laws. He knew exactly what to do. He showed them every day what to do. So they had a 7-day, 8-day practice. You with me? And as the Medrash says, they actually put together and took apart the Mishkan every day. They put the Mishkan together in the morning, and they took it apart in the evening, put it together in the morning, and the 8th day, that's when he didn't take it apart again.
And Moses had to do that himself, right?
Right. The question is, they do it every day, or was it the 8th day? That's a whole different argument. Okay. The Rebbe is going to take an interesting pasuk here, and he's going to build something on this, the beauty of this story. The beauty of this story. Right? We have a beautiful story in this week's Parsha about the investor Meluyim, as you see in text number 1. During the 7 days of initiation, okay, investor initiation, that's the English word they use over there. You see the Hebrew word that we're holding on page 166. This is in Rashi in this Parsha. It says Shekol Shivas Yimei Meluyim. All the 7 days of initiation, investor, whatever. Shemida Moshe the Mishkan, Moshe erected the tabernacle, the Shimash boy, and he serviced it. Upeka b'chol yom, and he dismantled it every single day. What? Whatever. It's impossible. This is the story. This is the Rashi. You give him a call. So this is what the Rashi says. He took it apart, and in essence, he wanted to show the Yidden, Leviim, the Kehanim, exactly what would be, because this was a Mishkan that was taken apart and put together. So Moshe Rabbeinu, in essence, he was the as you see in this week's portion, it says Kashatziv Hashem es Moshe, like God commanded Moshe. It says like 18 times in this week's portion. Repeats it over and over as God commanded Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu, even though he was not involved in the actual building of the Mishkan, he was not involved in this actual building of the making of the Mishkan, but this was his time when he was a Kohen. He was the Kohen Gadol, so to say, the high priest for the 7 days that he did these days. So we find an interesting expression in the Torah concerning Moshe Rabbeinu's involvement in the Mishkan for those days. and the way he did the service. And what it says, if you listen to the words of the Parsha. So you listen to text number 2 on page 166. Let's see if you get it. Let's see if anybody gets it over here. Just from the verses, okay? So the verses, these are the verses in this week's Parsha, page text number 2, Exodus chapter 40, verse 29 to 33. It says, he placed the altar and the burnt offering in front of the entrance of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. And he offered up a burnt offering and the meal offering as God has commanded him. Verse 33, he set up a courtyard around the tabernacle and the altar, and he put up the screening of the entrance to the courtyard. And with this, Moshe Rabbeinu completed the work. That's the 2 psukim in this Parsha. Does anybody over here see something indifferent without looking further? Don't cheat. Does anybody over here see anything different, right? Anything unusual in these 2 psukim of the Torah, these 2 verses? Anybody? That you bring an oil was brought on the on the mizbeach was a burnt offering. He did. He did all the days. The Torah is talking about he did all those days. He finished the work. So, anybody see something weird over here? Different?
He completed the work?
Nope.
No.
So what's interesting is, and if you look at the verses of the Torah, anybody wants to unzoom something, they want to say what they see in these 2 psukim, what he just brought out. Anybody? Nope. Okay. So the answer is that he built the courtyard after he brought the offering, and that is not the way it's done. So we know that's not the way it's done. You have to have the whole Mishkan to bring a sacrifice. You can't bring a sacrifice before you have the Mishkan built, right? That's like moving into a house that doesn't have any walls. Here, we didn't put up the courtyard yet. As you look at the verses, it doesn't say, it says he made the altar, he brought a sacrifice as God commanded, and then in verse 33, he says he made this courtyard. So that is the question. If you look at the verses in the Torah, something is missing over here. Not only something missing over here, because that's not the way it was done, but that's not the way in halacha it needs to be done. In Jewish law, you cannot bring a sacrifice in the temple if something is missing in the temple itself. So over here, he brought a sacrifice on the temple, on the altar before he even had a courtyard. So this is not practical to make sense, and it doesn't make sense in Jewish law. And where do you see that? That's where you see the Torah. If you go later on in Numbers, the book of Numbers, and it talks about how the Beis Hamikdash was set up, it says in text number 3, Gershon and Merari families in charge of erecting the tabernacle. The Levium were in charge of erecting this tabernacle. Preceded Koss family who carried the sacred furnishing. So we know that first the tabernacle was the way the Jewish people journeyed. Was first the tabernacle went in front of them, separated. It was dismantled, and the tribe of the Levium carried the actual tabernacle. The vessels of the tabernacle were carried by the family of the Kehanim, right? And they got Gershon, by different families. The Merari carried the actual tabernacle, the walls. They came first. They came wherever they stopped, wherever they were supposed to stop. They would put together the Mishkan, which makes sense. You first put together the house, and then the vessels came after that. So by the time the vessels, the people that were carrying the vessels of the Mishkan came to the place where they were supposed to stop, the temple was built already.
Didn't the Levites build it, Rabbi?
Right. So the Merari, the ones who
Oh,
carried
okay.
the walls and all the curtains of the courtyard came, stopped where they were in front. They were in front, and it took them whatever half an hour to put it together. Let's say, by the time they put it together, the next family that was carrying the menorah, the shulchan, now they came. You had already a standing up building. They moved in. That's what normal. That makes common sense. They were rectitag in advance. So at the time, the Kahas family, they were Merari. There were three Gershon, Kahas, and Merari. So there were the three families. So Kahas carried the altar and all the holy stuff. The Merari carried the walls. The what do you call it? Gershon carried the covering, etc. So first came the Merari family. They built the Mishkan. Then came the Gershon family, put up the curtains, and then came Kahas, who was carrying the utensils, and they moved it in. They would bring the ark, the tabernacle, and the altar. You're not going to bring things to a place that's not built. Right? You're not going to bring vessels. You're not bringing your furniture to your house before you build the house. Right? First you build the house, then you bring the furniture. That makes common sense. That's what needs to be done. So here, Moshe Rabbeinu did the opposite. He put the altar there, he made a sacrifice. And then he put the walls around it. This makes sense. Doesn't make sense to do it that way, right? The truth is, we mentioned this a couple weeks ago, that if you look in the story of the Torah, in the way the Torah is written, Parsha Truma, if you remember Parsha Truma, it's like 4 weeks ago, which started off the dedication of the temple, of making the temple. What says first?
Money.
No, that's good money. That says first. I'm talking about the actual making of the Mishkan. What talks first? The Mishkan or
No,
the
God.
utensils? What?
Hashem descended and let them know where to set up.
No. I'm talking about the Mishkan, the making of the Mishkan. If you remember portion of Truma, if you remember that portion, what says first, the utensils or the walls? No, the utensils. So that starts off first. The first thing God commanded the Parshas Truma is the Aron, and then he goes to the Shulchan, and then he goes to the Menorah, he goes to the Aron, the Menorah, the Shulchan, etc. And then he comes to the walls. When it comes to Vayakel, the actual building of the Mishkan, it flips it. It says Betzalel built the walls first. The Medrash says that they had an argument. Moshe Rabbeinu and Betzalel had an argument. What to build first? The Betzalel was the major builder of this temple, right? Betzalel. So Moshe Rabbeinu and Betzalel had an argument. What do you build first? Moshe Rabbeinu said you build first the utensils because that's what God commanded, and Betzalel said no, you build the building first, and then you build the utensils. And Moshe Rabbeinu ultimately agrees. He says, okay, you know what? We'll do that. We'll go there. Betzalel. It must mean that you have, and Chassidus explains this argument, which sounds like a trivial argument, but they had a deep argument. And ultimately, I'm proving that they had a deep argument, is that when Moshe Rabbeinu did the actual service, he actually did what he said. So even though Moshe Rabbeinu Moses agreed with Betzalel, you have to build the building and then build the utensils. Ultimately, you see in this week's portion, he actually did what he thought. First, he brought the sacrifice, and then he built the building, and then he put up the building. So ultimately, even though he agreed with Betzalel, when it came to the actual doing in the base, he did what he said. He said, first goes the utensils, and then we'll build the building. But he agreed to Betzalel. He agreed to him. You see in text number 4, the Rashi says.
There's an art school, very famous art school,
Yeah.
called Betzalel in those.
Oh, yeah? Okay. Betzalel objected. The common custom is to build a home first and then fill it with furniture. Moshe Rabbeinu replied, You were in the shadow of God. Surely that is what God said to me. Even though I think you should build the utensils first, and then. But since you have some kind of a deeper connection than me, we'll go with the building first, and we'll see what you'll see ultimately. What is this? What's the meaning behind this disagreement? Indeed, this is how he built it: the tabernacle first, and then the furnishing. So that's the way it was done. Ultimately, we know that's the way it's done, and that the building goes first, and then the utensils. And Bezalel had this argument with Moshe Rabbeinu already before, and Moshe Rabbeinu agreed to him that you have to go the building first, and then the utensils. And here Moshe Rabbeinu does the total opposite. Yeah.
I don't understand. Text 2, it says, and you're saying, but Moshe went with Bezalel's. I don't understand. Text 2.
Text 2 contradicts text 4. That's correct. Text 2, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't do what he agreed ultimately. What he agreed to Bezalel.
So which was done?
What?
Which was done?
Ultimately, in the future, that's what was done. That you first built the tabernacle, then you brought the utensils. You couldn't bring us out. But on those 7 days, seemingly Moshe Rabbeinu flipped the order. So the question is again, why did Moshe Rabbeinu flip the order? When he agrees with Bezalel, why does he flip the order ultimately?
Says on the bottom, we don't always follow the rules.
Very good, very good. Very good. We'll soon get to that. That shows, it seems like we don't follow the rules. He don't follow his own rules. Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't follow the rules that he agrees to. So therefore, the Ramban in Nachmanides, in text number 5, says that's the way he did it, Taka. It's not true. He didn't do it. He didn't. Even though the verses are not in order, it's the verses are not in order. So the Nachmanides say that it says it doesn't make sense. So why would Moshe Rabbeinu do that? It doesn't make sense. So Nachmanides in text of a Moshe offered up a burnt and meal offering at a later point. So even though the verse is before, 29 goes before 33, but we know the general rule, there's no chronological order in the Torah. It's not a problem that one verse comes before the other verse. It is forbidden, because the Nachmanides says it's forbidden to offer up a sacrifice in an open yard that's not screened in. It's a Mishkan. You cannot, until it's a Mishkan, you cannot bring a sacrifice. So Moshe Rabbeinu knew that law. How do you do a law against the law? Doing so would have rendered the offering unfit, for it would have been slaughtered outside the tabernacle. We therefore conclude that he brought those offering at a later point. That's it. Nachmanides says, therefore, I don't look at the chronological order of the verses. Even though verse 29 is brought before verse 33, it's really the other way. That's it. That's because it doesn't make sense.
So Hashem asked that we make a burnt offering for him.
Correct.
So if this is in the Torah and we're supposed to still do burnt offerings, why don't we do?
Because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. That's the point. That's the point. How did Moshe Rabbeinu bring a burnt offering when there's no Beis Hamikdash at that present moment? The courtyard has not been built. So therefore, the courtyard has not been built. You can't bring an offering. Today you don't have a Beis Hamikdash. You can't bring an offering.
Build it at that spot?
Now you can only build it in that spot. So finished. Until the third Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, you can't bring an offering. That's it. You have a technical problem. That's it. You have a technical problem. So Moshe Rabbeinu, in essence, could have waited. The Ramban said he did. And then go to Ramban, according to Nachmanides, he did. That's it. It didn't make sense. You cannot say that Moshe Rabbeinu brought the offering before he put up the thing. That has to be against Jewish law. And you cannot do that. So he didn't do it. And therefore, the Ramban learns the psukim in a different way. The problem is that Rashi doesn't. Rashi doesn't do that. Rashi, that comes to talk to every basic pasuk, comes, explains the pasuk. To him, it sounds like that it's not true. That Moshe Rabbeinu did flip it over. Did in those 7 days change the rules. Yes.
I mean, it seems that Moses was making Jewish law by the words of God. And so if this is mixed up and it doesn't make sense, it makes it really confusing to take seriously.
All right, good question. That's right. That's the question. But that's the question. That's good. Good question. Good question. Good question. That's the question. That's the question, and that's why the Ramban says you have to follow Jewish law. Moshe Rabbeinu followed Jewish law, and the law is that God's law, and the law is you have to have a mishkan to bring a sacrifice, and Moshe Rabbeinu followed that law. He didn't, and we know that from then and on, that was the law that was followed.
Didn't that come after? I mean, this is first what you're reading right here, what Moses did with the burnt offering in the tabernacle.
Yeah,
that came first.
Yeah, but we know Jewish law. We know ultimately Jewish law. Jewish law, you have.
Without this.
No, so then why wouldn't they do it always? Because we know Jewish law. Moshe Rabbeinu told them the law. You cannot bring a sacrifice without having a temple. We know that law. So we know that law. That law is written in the Torah. But ultimately, we see over here you'll soon understand. Wait a second. You'll see a division, or what do you call it, deviation of Jewish law. And as you'll soon see, the Rebbe says it's not deviation. You'll soon see. You'll understand as you go along.
So the third temple can only be built when the Mashiach comes.
Correct.
They say that
They
it's
don't want to
real
jumpstart.
We tried to jumpstart. We try to jump. We try to bring Mashiach every day. We try to jumpstart. Okay. Number one. So in essence, so we have two questions over here. We're going back to the again. We're trying to understand, according to Rashi, that the Moshe Rabbeinu, in essence, did the sacrifice before the temple was built. Number one, does it make sense to do that? Number two, does Jewish law permit to do that? So we have two questions on if you read the psukim, if you read the verses in its chronological order, and you go according to the Rashi, learns the psukim, the verses, then you have these two questions. Why would he do it? And would it be right, according to Jewish law, to do it? And we have to answer that difference the way you look at the psukim. And then what's the lesson, self-understood? What is the lesson, really? That's the more important thing over here. What is the lesson from this situation? Yeah.
I wanted to say that Rabbi told me that the Beit HaMikdash is built already, it's in heaven, and it's
Right, yeah, but it's not. Yeah, this is not a class on the third Beis Hamikdash. Let's go back to the class. Okay. So the Rebbe says the Rebbe answers this question. We first have to answer the question, the Jewish law question. That's really needs to be answered, because Rashi, according to the commentator of the simple pasuk, doesn't agree with the Machmanides. So we simply need to answer that question. That's the most important question. How is Moshe Rabbeinu allowed in Jewish law to do it different than the law itself? The answer that Rebbe gives is you have to understand the difference between the 7 days of initiation and the 8th day of dedication. And that's where you got to make the difference between the initiation, which would be the concept of education, and the concept of when you pass the educational period. These are called the 7 days of Miluyim. They didn't take the temple down every day. They only took the temple down those 7 days. Right? That's it. They took the temple up and down those 7 days. On the 8th day was a day of dedication, when Aaron became the high priest. And Moses became the simple Levite again. He moved aside. On the 8th day, he became the simple guy, the regular Levite that he was. So for 7 days, he was the Kohen, he was the high priest, and he did all the sacrificial offering. This was a day. These 7 days are called days of initiation, which I want to call days of education. You can learn this class that the Rebbe is talking about education of children. You can learn this class that it's each and every one of us is a child, and we have times of education, and then we have to have times of graduation, right? We cannot be in education forever. Okay, you have to ultimately. I don't mean that you should stop you should stop learning. You have to. I mean, ultimately, when you when you learn a subject, you need to ultimately graduate the subject, right? Right? You have in Chassidus, you learn machshava, dibur, ma'aseh. This thought, this speech. It's got to come down to action, or else we're wasting our time. Right? If we're going to live in the world of speech forever, or in the world of thought, then we didn't have to be here, because your soul has greater thought in heaven. You came down into the world that you should learn thought, you should learn speech, and what it should be, you should do. It has to come down to doing. You can't be in the thought forever. I mean, you could. It's a free choice to be in the thought forever. A lot of people are in that thought and speech forever. You know, learning never ends. They're learning and they're learning and they're learning. They'll do it when they finish learning. And they never do anything because they're learning. They're perpetual in college. 50 years old, they're still in college. They're still learning. There's a time to learn, there's a time to do. So ultimately, there are 2 stages in every person, especially in a child's life. That's self-understood. Even in Torah law, a child is not responsible until he's 13 or a girl 12 years old, right? So we have 12, 13 years of education. Learning. Now comes 13 years old. What are you going to do with all this learning? What are you going to do with it? That's more important. Now you become responsible. The truth is, again, I believe in any education. You're going to learn a subject, in Torah subject, you need to learn it. Take it as long as you want to learn it. Ultimately, you need to do it. Or move on to another subject. Seems like the subject is not resonating in your existence for whatever reason.
While you're learning it, you can put it into action.
Yeah.
Too. There's a difference between putting it into action and graduating.
I use the word graduating. Not the right word. That's what I was trying to give that. Don't hang up on my English words. I'm not such an English major. So okay. I mean, ultimately, yeah, you should do that. That would be the best. That as you learn, you continue to do. Because learning never ends, and the truth is, you can do things better and better and better. So the action also never ends, really. Because I can do an act in one way, I can do it more emotion, I can do it more intellect, I can do an act also in many different levels. But ultimately, you got to do. It's got to come to an act. You got to come to some aspect of an act that's what I meant by graduating. You got to go from the education to the action. You don't want to. When you teach a child, you don't want him to wait till you try to make him a mensch. You don't say, "I'll wait till you're 13 to be a mensch." Hopefully, when he's a child, you want him to be a mensch then also. But you don't. If he's not a mensch when he's 10 years old or 7 years old, you take it as okay, he's a kid. What do you want? He's a kid. I try to educate him. He's a kid, still a kid. A kid's going to be a kid. But once he becomes an adult, it's time to grow up. It's not funny anymore. It's not cute anymore. It's not cute.
You really learn when you start doing it.
Right. That's another thing. That's another concept. But ultimately, what you a 2-year-old throws a food around the room, it's cute. But not a 20-year-old. It's just not a cute thing. You don't say gaga guga. It's a cute thing. Even if it's your child, you're not going to say, "Oh, that's a cute thing. Throw it again." It doesn't work that way, because you're an adult. It's time to grow up. I taught you to eat like a mensch. It took me years and years to teach you not to throw your food around. It took time, and ultimately, hopefully, you learn. and you're going to live in that. Yeah, that's understandable. So the Rebbe, in essence, says the first 7 days were days of education. Education. Things were not normal. Things are not normal. Things don't go the regular way. Things don't have laws in the educational phase. Things don't work out exactly the way it should be in an educational phase. Then you come to the 8th day, that's the day of action. That's the day where Aaron becomes the priest. He is the guy. He was supposed to be the guy from day one, but you need this educational period. So let's look how the Rebbe explains it. The 8th day. And God spoke this week's Parsha. God spoke to Moshe saying, erect the tabernacle, attend the meeting on the first day of the first month. That's when you should erect it. What do you mean? It was erected 7 days before already, right? There was 7 days. What do you mean? God says, no, this day is when you erect the temple. What do you mean? I erected it for 7 days already. I've been erecting this temple and bringing sacrifices and doing everything for 7 days. No, David says, when is the day of dedication? That is on the 8th day. That's the real day. We know a tragedy happened on that day, right? That's later in the book of Leviticus, right? A tragedy happened on that day, right? The 2 sons of Aaron passed away on that day, right? So now came past in the 8th day. That's Kara Moshe La'adal Levado Zikri. So Moshe Rabbeinu summoned Aaron. That's the day it became a real thing. That's the day. Even though he did it for 7 days, exactly what they were going to do, not totally exactly, but what they were going to do in the temple, but it didn't happen till the 8th day. And what's that 8th day? It came to pass on the 8th day of initiation. This is the first day of the month of Nisan. Rashi says, the day the tabernacle was accomplished, was established. That's it. So Moshe Rabbeinu,
I might be banned from future classes, but to me, it sounds like it was a test direction. It was a test direction. Let's test it. We'll put it up, leave it there for a couple of minutes.
No,
let's see how it
it's
works.
education. It's education. Why
If it's
why
okay.
not educate? It's education.
Yeah.
It's education. Everything needs education. Nothing can come about without education. You can't expect Aaron and his sons to run this Beis Hamikdash the way it's supposed to be if they wouldn't be educated in it.
It's like,
because we know in Torah law that being a Kohen was a dangerous job.
oh,
Okay? Being a Kohen was a dangerous life. It was a life and death situation. Because look in the Torah, you'll see the next week in the Leviticus, if they didn't do certain things in a certain way, it was a death situation. This was not a joke. This was a serious job for them. That's why it says, the Gemara says, Kehanim were nervous people. They were extremely nervous people. Kehanim.
That's what happened to their sons.
The Kehanim are nervous people because this is not a joke. This is not did not volunteer, oh, I didn't do the job right. I'm sorry. I apologize. You can't blame a volunteer. And it's not a joke. This was a serious job, and therefore self-understood you needed to have maybe more than 7 days. And as you see, that on the 8th day already, what happened? 2 of the sons of Aaron passed away. So this was a dangerous job.
like an opening Broadway play. You gotta have some days.
We don't have to go to opening Broadway plays. Nobody's put to death if they're lousy at a Broadway play.
I don't know about that.
I don't know.
So whatever Aaron's sons did on the 8th day, they would have done on the first 7 days, they wouldn't have suffered the penalty?
No. Good education. That's it. On the 8th day, it's serious stuff. In essence, that's your answer. Moshe Rabbeinu did
The real deal.
on the 7 days is because he said it's you don't need to do it the way it needs to be done in the 7 days. And you'll see why. You'll see what was Moshe Rabbeinu's thought in this situation.
Becomes the real deal.
You're going to soon see what was Moshe Rabbeinu's thought in this situation. So text number 8, you find it in this. The Torah says, this you must do to sanctify the priest to me, bring Aaron and his sons to enter the tent of meeting. You have to go to the mikveh. This is a serious day. Sacred vestments belong to Aaron, should belong to his children after him, to be exalted by them and invest them with authority. The priest that has succeed him from amongst his sons will enter the tent of meeting to serve the holy, must wear them 7 days. Do to Aaron and his sons all that I have commanded you, initiate them for 7 days. So we know that the Eibishter says that these 7 days of education, of vesture, whatever we want to call it, initiation, was not only for this kohen. Any kohen that would be in the future would have to go through 7 days. Yeah, 7 days before would have to go through these 7 days. So we know that this concept of education, I want to call it education, is an important part of this Mishkan. It's an important part of any kohen or that would serve in this Beis Hamikdash, that they would have 7 days. They would have 7 days. And the 8th day would be the day that they become
Kohanim.
but in the 8th day, what?
Aaron's sons took the place as high priests, no?
Ultimately, when Aaron died.
Right.
Correct, yeah, sure. Eliezer, his son, became the high priest. The beauty of this story is that it was not only 7 days, but actually the 8th day also. The 8th day, Moshe Rabbeinu was still the kohen with his brother. Moshe Rabbeinu was still the kohen with his brother on the 8th day. That's what Rashi says. Moshe also led the service and brought the communal offering on the 8th day of initiation phase, the day the tabernacle was built. So Moshe Rabbeinu, even on the 8th day, that's really the clincher over here, that not only on the 7th day, because Moshe Rabbeinu was only there to educate. He was not there to actually do the service. He's not a kohen. Moshe Rabbeinu is a Levi. He's not a kohen. He's not allowed to do the service in Jewish law. Right? Kol Azara, Kol Yumas, the Torah says if a regular Jew comes to do the service, not a kohen, he's also the opposite of life. Moshe Rabbeinu was not a kohen.
But he also did the sacrifices, and I
God
thought that was
determined who's a kohen, Levi, and so God determined that, right? The sons of Aaron, anybody from Aaron is a kohen. Everybody from the tribe of Levi is a Levi. That's it. So if you're either
You're saying Moses was not a Kohen.
no, he's a Levi.
But he was acting as a Kohen.
He was acting as a Kohen, correct. So Moshe Rabbeinu was acting as a Kohen the first 8 days.
He should have been the first one.
He should have been the first Kohen, but he was not. The first Kohen was Aaron. Aaron was the Kohen. What was interesting is, no, you have to, I see like a dilemma. Moshe Rabbeinu was a Levi. Self-understood, he was the educator. That's why he was called the Rabbeinu, teacher. He educated his brother and his nephews. He Parsha taught them how to run the Beis Hamikdash. That's it. And you needed Moshe Rabbeinu to teach them how to run this Beis Hamikdash. This, again, was not a job that was a volunteer job. This was a job that carried great responsibility for this family, not only to Aaron, but his children and his grandchildren and the grandchildren that will come in the future. Today they don't have this responsibility because there's no Beis Hamikdash. So they don't have that responsibility. We still honor Kohen, like giving the first Aliyah, etc., or honoring him in other ways, but they don't have the responsibility that they had in the time of the temple. Mitzvah Mashiach will come. The Kohen again will have that responsibility in the Beis Hamikdash. The Levi has this responsibility in the Beis Hamikdash, but they each had different responsibilities. What's the matter?
Judaism and religion of Judaism was initiated before Moses came down with the tablets?
What?
I mean, from Abraham, so we going back to Abraham and then.
No, we're going back to the giving of the Torah,
So-
Mount Sinai.
Okay.
That's what we go back to.
So how can you classify a Cohen and a Levi before the Torah was actually given?
We don't classify, we classify it now.
Yeah, but
Aaron became a Kohen now. That's after the Torah, that's when the tabernacle was made. So Aaron became a Kohen now,
How can Moses not be a Cohen?
because Moses is a Levi. A Kohen is not a tribe, a Kohen is a family. Levi is a tribe, and a Kohen is a family. So I don't both Levi and a Kohen, but really, once he became a Kohen, they lost the title Levi, in essence. They come from the tribe of Levi, but they're a Kohanim.
So when was this implemented?
Now,
When-
right now in the story. Now, that's when it was initiated. Now. And also, it's important the part of the story because any person who was born already, because there were only 4 Kahana that were initiated, 5 Kahana. Aaron, his 4 sons were initiated. Any children that these sons had, two sons we know they didn't have any children. The 2 that Nadav and Aviah had no children. Eliezer and his son had children already. They were not going to be Kahana, they would be Levis. They would not be Kahana. Any children that were born to these 2 sons before were not Kehanim. Any children that were born after this initiation were Kehanim. And that's why the story of Pinchas comes up later. Because Pinchas was already born, and he was not a Kohen. He was a Levi. But God gives him later the story of Pinchas. God says, I'm going to make you a Kohen. So that's the way it was. So whoever was anointed at that time, there was again 5 Kehanim, Aaron, his 4 sons, but already on the first day, 2 disappeared. So ultimately, from the 8th day and on, there was only 3 Kehanim in the temple, 3 guys, Aaron and his 2 sons, and their children that were born later, after this thing. So that happened then, at that moment. But ultimately, in these 8
I have
days,
a question.
yes.
When Abihu and Nadav died, did they have children? And are
No,
those
they had no children.
They had, so there's no Kohanim from them.
Well, it wouldn't be anyway because they again only children from that were born after this thing. So even
Okay.
if they would have had children, they wouldn't have. But they didn't have.
Okay,
It. We know they
Okay.
had no children.
all right.
But we know that Eliezer had children. It was Pinchas ben Eliezer. Pinchas was the son of Eliezer. He was born before this initiation, before this investure. So he was not going to be a Cohen. He was going to be a Levi. So Pinchas originally was not going to be a Cohen, even though he came from Eliezer, who was a Cohen. But the 3 of them were anointed. Aaron and his 2 sons that survived were anointed on those days, those 8 days. So again, Moshe Rabbeinu, who was a Levi and stayed a Levi, never changed, became a Kohen, did the service in the temple the first 8 days. He was the one who did the service in the temple. Aaron ultimately took over on the 8th day. Okay? You with me? That means Moshe Rabbeinu came in the morning of the 8th day, right? He knew that that once he does a service today, that's it. He's out of a job. He's going back to his original position, which is a regular Levi. I mean, he was a leader of the Jewish nation, but okay. But he lost his job as a Kohen. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to be a Kohen. We know that. The Medrash says that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to be the Kohen Gadol. He wanted that job. But God said, no, I'm giving it to your brother. And he's going to be the Kohen Gadol. He and his children are going to be a Kehanim. And that's what ultimately happened on the 8th day. That's ultimately the transition. But on the 8th day, in essence, on this Yom HaShmini, on this 8th day, you had both of them, Moses and Aaron doing the service. And it makes sense in education because, again, what happens is on the 8th day, they both did it together in a way, right? But what happened on the 8th day, according to the story? What happened the 8th day is that Moshe Rabbeinu came to the temple, right? Put up the Mishkan, then put the Mizbeach up, brought the sacrifice, as Rashi says, and then built the curtain around it. That's what he did. On the 8th day, he came. On the day of dedication, he came. So that's what the Rebbe writes in text number 9. The 8th day of initiation was part of the preparatory educational phrase for the tabernacle service and the commandment of make me a sanctuary. It's not problematic for the service to begin immediately upon the altar erection before the screening of the yard, because the rule for an educational services are different. And that's how the Rebbe answers the major question. We're going to go to the question, why did he do that? But the question in Jewish law, the Rebbe answers, because we are in the phase of education. Until the 8th day, we are all still in the phase of education.
But in the education, why wouldn't he want to do it right?
Right, that's the question. Why wouldn't he want to do it right on the age of education?
Yeah.
That's the question. That's the question. But we know in number one is halacha, it's not a problem. Now we're going to go to why he did it and what's the lesson to us. That's really what we're going to come to, okay? Because we're late already. I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to start off with a story of the Alter Rebbe to explain this in a story format. This is a story that was told by the Frierdiker Rebbe, Tivish Babcher Rebbe. In the Alter Rebbe's times, the Alter Rebbe lived in the late 1700s, in the 1800s, 18th century. Started off in the world, at that time, in the Jewish world, started the Haskalah movement. They were called the Enlightenment. And they started off in Germany, actually. This was the beginning of ultimately the Reform movement. But it started off as the Enlightenment, the Haskalah movement. So we're talking about over 200 years ago. Started a Haskalah movement, and this was a movement that said, we got to become enlightened. That's what they call the Haskalah, intellectuals. We need to become. We need to become. We're too much in the ground. Our heads are too much in the ground. We need to become enlightened. Yiddishkeit needs to open up its eyes, open up its brains, and become part of the world. Right? The Jews are, and it became. It became a big movement. Started off in Germany, ultimately came to Poland, ultimately came to Russia, Ukraine. It got a lot of traction, this movement. You can look it up, the Haskalah movement. Haskalah, the Enlightenment. Ultimately, there were big battles because they got involved with the government, self-understood, while the basic religious communities didn't get involved with the governments. They got involved with governments that automatically tried to pressure Jews to change their ways of doing things, etc., etc. So it started off with the government, Russia and Poland getting involved in Jewish education was all from this movement, the Haskalah movement. You can look it up, and you can read about it. It's a fascinating period of time in Jewish history. There was a guy called Shimon von Zemut, who decided, he was part of the Haskalah movement, he decided that he was going to penetrate the Hasidic movement. He said it's time to, they were more penetrating, they were more going after those on the fringes of easy, so to say, easy target Jews, to get them involved. He decided he was going to penetrate the Hasidic movement. That was a tough group to penetrate. And he went to Ladi. He came to Ladi, came with the Alter Rebbe was, and he came dressed and officially as a Hasidic Jew. And he was a learned person. These were not unlearned people. He was learning people. He said he wanted to become a teacher. Wanted to become a teacher of in a school. And he decided that he would become a teacher, and he was a good teacher. And he would slowly, to the back end, he would slowly, introduce to the kids that, you know what, open your minds, stop thinking, stop thinking immature, premature, what do you want to call it, thoughts. So you get out of the way you're learning everything in a very primitive way, in a very primitive kind of concept. You got to open your minds. That's what they call themselves, a scholar, enlightenment. They basically said we need to enlighten ourselves. We are, we're into all the teachings, the old teachings. Like people tell me today, like Rashi, or why is it Rashi? Like why do the medrashim that we learn, crazy medrashim, well, these are archaic stuff. It's for the past. These are story tales of the past. We gotta become enlightened. We gotta become smarter people. We gotta live with the reality. Stop living in a fantasy of crazy stuff, right? Like I say, I said to a group of people that Moshe Rabbeinu put them in, like they laugh. It's a Baba Maisa. Like why do we need to say that for? Why do we need to come up with these stories? Or like Moshe Rabbeinu could not put. Rashi says to a child, Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't do it, and God says, "Put your finger to it, and I'll do it." Like, okay, another good story. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Why teach children things that don't make sense? Or as you'll soon see, this dialogue that this Jew has with the Alter Rebbe. A very interesting dialogue. I'm sure you'll see this dialogue, you're going to say the same thing. A lot of us will say the same thing. Yeah? We'll see. Okay? So stop the story, because the story surrounds a story of a verse in the Torah. We learned this a couple of months ago. The story of Jacob and Esau. It's a story, beautiful story. Jacob wants to give Esau the blessings, right? And Yaakov comes in and he steals the blessings from his brother, right? Yaakov comes in, steals the blessings, right? Puts on a hairy hairs, the whole thing. He steals the blessings. What happens? The Torah continues, and it says that after Yaakov Avinu left, after Jacob left, Esau comes into the house, right? Esau comes in. What happens when Esau comes into the room? The verse says, Vayechrad, is text 11. It says, Vayechrad, and Isaac shuddered, a great shudder. And he said, who then is the one who hunted a game and brought it to me? And I ate everything before you arrived, and I blessed him. He shall be blessed. Why did he shudder? Why did he shudder? Why did he shudder? Right? So in a simple thing, right? He gave the blessing. Guy tricked him. He shuddered. Comes Rashi, and Rashi says, no, he didn't shudder. He shuddered because Gehenim opened up under him. That's Rashi. That's Rashi. You see in text of 11b, Rashi. And Jacob shuddered, as rendered Tayyar the Savi was perplexed. That's one simple answer. The Medrash explanation, he saw Purgatory open up beneath him. He saw Gehenim open up beneath him. Right? So you're laughing. So that's what Rashi says. Rashi is teaching this to a 5-year-old child. Right? Rashi is teaching this to a 5-year-old child. He's telling him a Medrash. It's the Medrash. Rashi is telling them a Medrash. Right? Let's go back to the story. Ready? Back to the story. The Pekudei Rebbe writes this story in his memoirs. Text number 12. On Wednesday, my turn, the Tzidra is telling the story of this guy, Shimon, who went into the Alter Rebbe. He went into the Alter Rebbe, to tell him about his job. He's a teacher here, and he's a wonderful teacher, and whatever. They had a meeting. Right. The light the guy went into the Alter Rebbe. On Wednesday, he's writing the story of his meeting with the Alter Rebbe. On Wednesday, my turn arrived to be received by the Rebbe for a private audience in the chamber of Chassidic Hall, which is called by Chassidim the Supernal Gan Eden. When I entered the Rebbe's chamber, I was struck with fear and awe by the appearance of his face, his powerful and penetrating glance, and his mighty and deliberate voice inquired, "What can I do for you? You're coming to me. What do you need from me?" But I immediately recovered and calmed myself. I said, "I am an elementary school teacher in my hometown, and I teach my pupils according to the rules of Hebrew grammar." The Rebbe leaned forward, the Alter Rebbe leaned forward on his forearms, and then raised his head, opened his eyes, and asked me how I explained the passage. And Isaac was this passage. How do you explain it? That Aaron was that Isaac was seized by great trembling to my students. How would you explain this passage if I ask you? I explained that to the first interpretation, he was a learned guy. He said I explained it according to the first interpretation of Rashi. That it means he was perplexed, I replied. And why don't you explain it according to the second? Why do you skip the second interpretation? The Alter Rebbe asked Rashi Medrash that he saw Pekudei open beneath him. He asked. So I thought I'm going to be smart, right? I said, in my opinion, one shouldn't fill pupils' delicate minds with Agada in general, and especially with subjects of Pekudei that might frighten them. I can tell 5-year-old children, I can tell them Gehenna, fire. You're going to put these kids in fear. We must especially abstain from teaching young children things that can't even imagine. The pupil will wonder how a large and wide opening in Pekudei can fit in Isaac's small room. And how could its fires, which have been blazing uninterrupted for 5,555 years, enter the room? And yet Esav and his father survived and not burned up as a crisp. You were telling them they opened up Gehenna. Why did they all die? So I don't want to tell children crazy things. And how does
Age appropriate.
What?
Age appropriate.
Right. Correct. And how does the best question is, the Medrash says Pekudei. How does the Medrash know that? Where does the Medrash come up with that? The Medrash said it's Pekudei. How does the Medrash know that? And how does the Medrash know that he saw Pekudei? I wouldn't say that in the verse. It said he shuddered. So shudder means he saw Gehenna. Where does the Medrash know that? How did he come up with that? Some rabbi decided, what the heck? It sounds good. Let's throw in Pekudei. Let's throw in some fire. Let's make this. Let's turn this into some theatrical thing. I remained silent, making no reply. Obviously, I had no answer. Indeed, this would not be the first gross exaggeration found in the Medrash and the Talmud. When he saw that I remained silent, the Rebbe said, when Esav entered Isaac's room, Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" To this Esav replied, "I am Esav, your firstborn." But that was a lie. Because he sold it. He sold it. He had already sold it, his birthright, to Jacob in a legal sale with all the required formalities. Isaac knew this, and he was very frightened by the lie that attempted to annul a reality that was valid by Torah law. This caused him to tremble, for telling such a lie results in Pekudei opening beneath him. The Rebbe, what?
Esau lied? Or
Esav lied.
because he's no longer
He's no longer the firstborn. He sold it.
With a pot of stew.
Correct. When the Rebbe finished speaking, he leaned on his forearms, as he'd done before. Then he raised his head, the Alter Rebbe. He opened his eyes. It's customary that wherever he receives people, even during the daytime, that there are 2 lit candles, a chumash, a zohar on the table. He now lifted one of his 2 candles, scrutinized me, and said, "You come here from Vilna, but you claim you come from Zamut. You converted little children to idolatry of Haskalah, but you claim to be a Melamed. Because of these lies, Pekudei opens beneath you." How many souls have you already destroyed? Yet you continue to betray. Yes, it is true. You are a heretic. And anyone who goes down this road will never return. I quickly fled the chamber. Out and ever pulled the rug underneath my my chair.
How did he know that? He felt it, he's.
I don't know. Out and ever. I don't know.
And Rabbi, I was thinking he was trembling because maybe he didn't think the preparation of the sacrifice and something that he consumed was not done properly.
What are you talking about?
That's what I was thinking about.
Who trembled?
Isaac.
Isaac trembled his preparation for the sacrifice. I'm lost.
Esau brought him the sacrifices.
Oh no, he didn't.
That's where my mind went.
No, Rashi said, but Rashi gives two answers.
Okay.
Rashi gives it two. Doesn't mention that. Rashi answers he was petrified because he was perplexed what's going on over here, and number two is he felt purgatory. So in essence, the Alter Rebbe told this guy, you know what? You're a lie. You're basically a liar. You don't want, and because you're lying, your Parsha don't want to tell you know Yiddish Kinderlach the truth of the pasuk. You're afraid of giving the child, you know, something that you think that he cannot handle. The truth is that it's not a crazy pirush. It is an interesting medrash that he saw purgatory. I mean, that's why Rashi brings it second. You should know in general, when Rashi brings two perushim, two interpretations, the first is closest to the verse, and the second one is the second closest to the verse. So the first closest to the verse is that he was perplexed. But then the second one, so the Alter Rebbe says your first thing makes sense. Maybe it makes sense. Why would you teach children crazy things? But it's not crazy because it's part of Torah. Medrash is not a crazy thing. Both interpretations are not crazy. Not the simple interpretation, not the Medrash is crazy. There's two ways of learning something. There's two ways to learn something. There's one way to learn something in a normal way, and then there's a way to learn in a shocking way. Shock therapy. Yeah, shocking things. Rashi says, take a simple verse in the Torah, a simple story. Rashi says, I'm going to teach a child two ways. You can teach him in a progressive way. He was afraid. He was going to go intellectual. You tell him that the purgatory opened up underneath him.
You should make up stories that are lies.
You should say, and the child will ask you why the purgatory opened up underneath him. You tell the child because he lied. That's why. If you lie, purgatory opens up underneath you.
So you're
second Esav lied to Isaac. Isaac felt like a Gehenna came into him because somebody lied to him. His own son lied to him. So if his own son can lie to him, that is Gehenna. That his own son can think he can fool him, can lie to him.
Rabbi, for Chabad, I think you once spoke about giving honey while learning to make it sweet, but here
Right.
it's instilling fear.
Right, but once in a while, you got to tell people the truth. You got to give them over the head. You have to.
Make them fearful.
Sometimes the sweetness doesn't always work.
Make them fearful, though.
You get not fearful, but they know the truth. The truth is the truth. The truth is the truth. So you can package everything, but ultimately, you have to sometimes listen to the truth. You're going to learn a lot of Rashis when you learn Chumash, or you're going to learn a lot of Gemara, Midrashim. That will sound crazy. You're right. In a normal kind of progressive thing, they sound a little bit out there. But you know what? Not everything has to go. Not everything has to be. You can't always learn everything in a progressive way. There are things that we're learning Torah, we're learning God's Torah. This is some things are out there.
A
Cut
question.
and
If the
dry, cut and dry.
Oh,
Yeah.
if purgatory opened up and they didn't go to, I guess it was Sheol at that time, or Gehenna, if they didn't go down there and die, what happened to the open purgatory? What happened? What was the rest of the story after that
Which story?
about purgatory opening up?
What happened? Esav left, and Yaakov left. They both left, and Yaakov went to Haran to get married, and Esav sat and planned how to kill Yaakov one day, and that's life went on.
What happened to the open purgatory? Did it just
No, the
close?
point is, I don't know. Again, the point is that Yitzhak felt that the Gehenna opened up, and he's dealing with a person that has no redemption. He realized he wanted to give him a blessing, and in essence, he revealed who Asa really was. So just like the story, the guy came over there to fool the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him, the Alter Rebbe told him, "I know who you are. You don't have to fool me. You walked into the room. I know who you are."
But it doesn't have to,
Yitzhak, when Asa walked into the room, he said, "Okay, I know who you are." The second you open your mouth, I know who you are. You're a liar. So here I was hoping to bless you, and I realized that the blessing would be a waste because you're not. There's no redemption for you. Ultimately, there was no redemption for Esav. Esav never did tshuva. That's why Rivka didn't want to give the blessings to Esav, even though she loved Esav, but she didn't want to give him those blessings because she understood there's no end. The end for him they're not a positive end. Yitzhak felt the wish to give this blessing, but ultimately the second Esav lied, Yitzhak said, "I realized." He saw the Gehenna open up underneath him. He realized he's dealing with a fake liar, and there's no good ending to this situation. But that's a separate part of the story. The point is that you're right. Telling the child that hell opened up underneath it is a shocking statement. And maybe logically, why would you tell a child that? But you know what? Maybe you should tell a child that if you lie, that's what happens. There's no positive ending. If you lie, you'll continue to lie and lie and lie. You will have no good ending to your story. It's harsh. Look at the next. First in text number 13, Mabel. The first principle of practical pedigree is to establish a regular order. I think education. Every form of education seeks to impart knowledge. The pupil do not possess to develop a certain character trait. How is this achieved? Primarily through repetition or habituation, that they continue to learn over and over and over through daily and hourly measured repetition, by progressive in a balanced, deliberate, and progressive way in all times and places, and by using constant precision. Right? So although, the Rebbe writes in text number 14a, it's important that every Jewish child be taught according to their path, we mustn't be content with the limited pedigree that is common around the world. Though this too is consistent with Torah approach. Rather, our education must also include sacred, transcendental contents. Even if it's beyond the child's current understanding, we must even teach concepts of self-sacrifice on occasion. We have to tell the child, you have to educate yourself. You have to be able to handle a medrash. You cannot read a medrash where you're going to meet hundreds of medrashim even in the pasuk. She's going to be down 100 and you're going to start say it's crazy. Right? You realize you're reading the Torah. You're not reading a mathematical book. You're not reading a history book. You're reading a godly book. right? Well, ultimately, we're going to change the Torah itself. Forget about the Medrash. So when it comes to the crossing of the sea, they say, it didn't happen, a miracle. It was high tide, low tide. Forget about the Medrash. Forget about the Medrash. We try to change the Torah itself. We're dealing with the Torah. We're not dealing with some book out there, some book written by some person. We're dealing with God. God is transcending. And you got to be able to handle a transcending.
So are you saying that we don't know why Moshe didn't do it right during the?
So now that's what Moshe Rabbeinu didn't do it right. Because he said you got to be transcending. You don't got to follow. When we're learning, when we're in education, you got to be transcending. Maybe once we build the Mishkan, you need to be, you got to follow the rules. But when you're learning, you want to elevate yourself, you got to be transcending. If not, you'll never come to any holy plateau. You need to be transcending. The Rambam writes in a different way, this concept. If you have anger, if you have these issues, you have to go 180 degrees the other way. You got to be transcending. You got to say, I'm going to do something 100, it's impossible, it's not me. But I'm going to do that. I'm going to transcend myself. And then come back to be normal. But I need to transcend myself. If I can't transcend myself, I'll never be normal. Because the normal that I am is not normal. So I need to transcend myself. To come back to the normal path, I need to transcend myself. So if I have anger, I need to fake it. I need to be 1 day or 2 days. Nothing's going to anger me. I need to transcend myself. And then come back and be angry. And I'll have hopefully taught myself not to have anger. So I'll have anger less. I'll teach myself not to always be angry. But you need to transcend yourself. We need to transcend ourselves. We need to open up. When we learn Torah, we're educating ourselves. We need to have transcendence. If not, how do you learn? If you cannot transcend yourself. If everything has to make logical sense to you. You're learning a godly concept. You're not only learning a rational concept, you're learning a godly concept. If you're learning a godly concept, then God transcends. Then God does transcend.
So it doesn't have to make sense.
Not everything has to make sense. No, not everything has to make sense. So that you read in Rashi. Rashi said that why did they follow the golden calf? Because it was walking and eating. That's a transcending concept. It's a transcending concept. It's not a logical concept. It's a transcending concept. You're right. It is a transcending concept. But maybe suddenly the concept, you'll start thinking about the concept because it's transcending. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to tell the Jewish people, it's not only that that the synagogue is a place of holiness. No. Even you're going to have a synagogue, it's still a transcending concept. Even you're going to have a Mishkan, you still need to be, you need to go out of the transcending, right? It's not the concept of a Jew in the house and that was the ultimate slogan, a Jew at home and a regular person outside. Right. That was ultimately the thing, right? A Jew at home, a Jew in the synagogue, a German American in the street. No, you're right. In the shul, everybody's going to be Jewish. Everybody's going to act Jewish. The chachma is be transcending. You're a Jew everywhere. Oh, but it doesn't feel good acting like a Jew out there, maybe. It doesn't feel good. In the synagogue, it feels good. So in the synagogue, I can wear a yarmulke, I can feel comfortable in doing. But outside, I'm not comfortable with that. Makes me uncomfortable. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, I'm going to show you when you're still educating yourself. Be transcending. Be transcending. And realize that even though we're educating ourselves to build a Mishkan, but it's not about the building. It's about the service. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu wanted the vessels first, because it's about the service. And B'tzalel said you need a building. To do the service, you need a building. Right? That makes sense. You need a building. You want to do service, you need a building. Right? You want to daven, you need a building. Moshe Rabbeinu said, we don't need a building. Do a service anywhere. Do the service of God without a building. You have an altar, make him do the service. You don't need the official building. Right? And that's why he did the 7 days. He said, you know what? I'll do the service without the building. I'll tell a Jew, even though we're going to build a building, and once we build the building, now we have to follow the rules of the building. but the truth is that be transcendent. At the same time that you're in the situation, be transcendent. Realize to serve God is in the building, but it's also outside the building.
Sometimes different things work on one person to transcend that another person needs something entirely different.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm not giving you a one brush situation. I'm giving you everybody needs to do it in their way to be transcendent. And that's why Rashi, even though Rashi is talking to a 5-year-old child, also says transcending things to a 5-year-old child. Like I just said, like we just showed you that he shuddered because Gan Eden opened up. It's like a shocking statement for a 5-year-old. It's a shocking statement to everybody. But surely to a 5-year-old child that the Gehenna opened up.
It's shocking if you don't know what Gan Eden is, and you've never seen it. You never.
Yeah, but then open up in the room of Gehenna. It doesn't make sense. It's a shocking statement, and you find many of these statements in the Torah. And I know people, because people tell me, not children, but adults tell me, like, it's crazy. Like, why does Rashi say it? It's a crazy, it's not a reality. Right? It's not something practical. But you know what?
It's a thin line between that and a lie, though.
No, it's not a lie, because the Torah is not a lie, self-understood, so that's what happened. But if you have a practical thing, why bring an impractical thing? You have Rashi is the first thing is a practical. It was perplexed. Anybody can come with that answer. It was perplexed. But both are true. In essence, Rashi says both are true. It was perplexed. And the guy Gehenna opened up underneath in that room. Gehenna opened up. So the Rebbe writes in text number 14b, the pedagogical
The weird part, I'm trying to look it up.
approach
Pedagogical.
produces the desired result that even when they grow old, did not turn away from his teaching. It inspires pupils to a firm, durable, permanent commitment to Yiddishkeit. Even when it steps out of the home and the environment of holiness, they remain strong, firm in their Yiddishkeit. So you can do that. If you can do that, you can like the base of meat, the Mishkan was built, was Moshe Rabbeinu, even the 8th day, served in this Mishkan, showed a Jew that he's building a Mishkan, and he's going according to the normal, right? Betzalel is right, logically. He's right. Betzalel is logical. And it makes sense. You build the building first, and then you make a sacrifice. But nevertheless, I'm going to show Jews on this day that, you know what? You can go above. In the logic, you can realize there's above logic. In the logic, there's greater. There's greater. You're dealing with God. You're dealing with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need walls. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need buildings. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need all this. He needs service. He needs to do the service. So whether you have a Mishkan, where you don't have a Mishkan, where you're in the shul, you're out of the shul, serve the Eibishter. It doesn't make sense out there. It's uncomfortable out there. I don't know how to do it out there. I can do it here, but how do I do it out there? So we offer, the Rebbe ends off, we'll end it off right over here. So we offer sacrifice sometimes on bodily pleasures of the animal soul, even if we're not in a home that is illuminated permanently with godliness. That's it, with such houses of prayer or study. We also eat sacrificial meat. This represents the idea of our firm commitment to Yiddishkeit becomes our food and nourishment. We remain committed even if we are in an environment that is spiritually arid and not surrounded by walls and boundaries of holiness. Right, so we'll end this off text number 15. This is Rabbi Aaron Loshak, a writer in New York. And he writes, Rabbi, many parents take a common practice approach with their children. I don't want to overwhelm them with anything that is over the top or too intense. So I'll leave it to them to discover religion slowly without pressure. And so they are shielded from anything their parents deem too extreme or fanatic. Teach them some Hebrew, a little about Israel, rituals around the holidays. That's nice. Who doesn't like apples and honey and afikomen treats? That's great. But asking them to pray at the age of 10, to not watch TV the whole Shabbos every week, to really not eat non-kosher candy, relax. Let's take it easy. Just kids. Let's not scare them off with too much too soon.
It's not the same, Rabbi.
You're forgiving for thinking so. But Moshe teaches us that sometimes you must buck the common practice and leapfrog in a couple steps. Pile it on early without worry. On the contrary, doing so will ensure that even when the walls, whatever holiness they have come down, they'll still be strong with the value and passion you imbued within them before the walls went up. And as it is with children, so is it with us. Who wants to go crazy and bite off more than they can chew? You think to yourself, I got to take my things this slowly and methodically. This is a process, and I should take on too much too soon. You're right and you're wrong. You're right on the average day. Not every day is average. Sometimes you must get on the express train. Don't wait until you built an entire building of Jewish infrastructure before signing on for all the night Shavuos learning-a-thon, or getting your own pair of tefillin, or committing to monthly mikveh visits. Take the cue from Moshe, who offered a sacrifice even before the walls went up. You too can take the plunge right now. You're not ready? That's okay. The Jew in the desert weren't either. Moshe did what he did anyway, and it worked. Be like Moshe, it'll work for you too. Beautiful statement. What a beautiful teaching. What a beautiful teaching of the Rebbe. That's it. Sometimes we gotta just jump in. Sometimes it's gotta jump in. When we sit there, we contemplate, we meditate, and we hope, and we pray, and when on time I'll get it. When will I get it? Sometimes you got to jump in. You have to jump in. You know, it says that the two things a parent needs to teach his son in halacha. It's interesting. Number one is you need to teach him a job. He needs to teach him Torah. He needs to teach him Torah. Number two, he needs to teach him the three things. He needs to teach him a job to make a parnasa. Number three, he needs to teach him how to swim. It's an interesting thing. I can understand Torah. I can understand the job. Why would Allah tell you you need to teach him how to swim? No. Because when you teach him, you have to throw a kid into the water to teach him how to swim. And not only you have to throw a kid into the water, you got to jump into the water too. You got to jump with him into the water. Sometimes to teach Torah and to teach a guy parnasa, you got to jump in. You got to jump in. And that's how I was taught to swim too. I went in summer camp. I came to the lifeguard. I said, Neil, he said, come to me later. I came to him later. He threw me into the pool. And then he jumped in because I was going to drown. So he jumped in. But I learned not to fear it any since then. But you got to jump in. Sometimes you got to jump in. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu taught Am Yisrael. Taka, we're going to build a beautiful building. And this building is going to be a place where God's going to be revealed, and we're going to be sacrificed, blah, blah, and everything's going to be regulated. It'll be Kehanim and Leviim, and everybody's going to have their space, and everybody's going to have their time. You can't always come to this building, blah, 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 blah. It's beautiful. It's unbelievable. But you know what? Don't get lost in the building. Don't get lost in the rules and regulations. Get lost in the service of God. Get lost in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Jump into the service of God, whether you're ready for the formalities or not. Bring the sacrifice. Bring the sacrifice. God bless you all.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you. I don't think